So I hope everybody has been able to access Blackboard via Cengage or Cengage via Blackboard. So one of my other classes, I know we have a weird issue that I'm working on. So if you don't, send me an email and let me know, but I have not heard or seen that this class doesn't let you in there. So sometimes we have those challenges as we begin a course. So what we want to look at really quickly, and hopefully you've read the text, and we're going to do a lot of terminology and kind of the why. Why is this stuff important? Well, we know it costs a lot of money. Businesses now, the average cost of a cybersecurity attack is over $1 million. Well, I don't know about you, but $1 million is a lot of money. And some attacks have cost $400 or $500 million. So if we go back to things like Target, they've spent well over $500 million trying to repair an attack. Well, small businesses could be decimated by this. Most places now look at cybersecurity insurance as a requirement, just like they do for fires and floods. But even that doesn't necessarily pay out enough to prevent you. And then you've got the overhead on that. So it can get expensive very quick. So here's a question I have. We're going to secure all our data. And we've been trying to do this now for 40 years. Why isn't it done? Why haven't we figured it out? Why is it hard to do? Is it because everybody that's involved in cybersecurity for the last 40 years says, oh man, I need a job in the future, so let's go ahead and just not do it correctly? Or do we have lots of different kinds of attacks? Do we have new things coming out? Have we discovered vulnerabilities in older software? So I think we need to look at some of the things that are happening right now. And so a case that we're going to look at is something called SolarWinds. And so I know at least a couple of you work in the network field in here. You've probably heard of SolarWinds because it's a network control software. It's used by nearly every Fortune 500 company and most government agencies. And it got hacked. The company SolarWinds got hacked. And then when it pushed out new updates to all these clients, it embedded content in there so they could remote control in and do all kinds of things. Yikes. But other ones. We now know that some cars are vulnerable, that even through the Wi-Fi in the car, you can enable some of the control systems of the car. So we've seen movies where somebody remotely controls a car off a computer. It's not as far-fetched as you would like to think. Aircraft. How frightening would it be if somebody's sitting in there in passenger row 37B window aisle, but they're able to actually change things on the aircraft? Well, it's not that far-fetched, and it's actually happened. So a couple years ago, I got to have lunch, and we had a cybersecurity conference, and we actually met with a guy named Robert Smith, who's a cybersecurity professional, but he dwells a little on that crazy side. So when we went to this luncheon, he's wearing a kilt. He's 6'6" with a mohawk, but he tells a tale, and a tale one the airlines don't want out, that through the entertainment system, he was able to get control of some of the aircraft systems. He's banned from most airlines now. So rather than fix the problem, we bury our head in the sand. And the reality, those systems on those planes, they're trying to make them as lightweight, and they don't necessarily separate them as much. The largest email attack ever, Yahoo. Does anybody here got Yahoo email? Oh, that's good. They lost over 8 billion records to hackers. Oh, great. We've had issues with or claims that voting machines have been tampered with this year alone. Space Agency, IRS has gotten hacked. Hyatt Controls. Anybody here shop at Hy-Vee? Yeah. So I'm driving into work today, and I hear that Hy-Vee announced a settlement because they had malware, spyware, stealing your credit card information at a lot of their gas stations and other things. And they announced a settlement with customers. that had gotten hacked. Every day, if you look on there, you're going to see it. Small towns around here. Some of you know where Beatrice is. Anybody from Beatrice? Just double checking. Little town, 40 miles from here. They got hit with what's called a ransomware attack we're going to talk about later. Their entire city was shut down for 2 weeks. They couldn't make utility payments. And because they also included things like the city attorney, we were all on one single system, court files were lost. Their phone system was down. It happens. It happens a lot. So, some of the reasons for this, and we'll talk about others. We know that a lot of software, a lot of hardware has vulnerabilities. Great. So there's already an issue. There's a hole in it. We have configuration issues. My guess is 90% of the people that buy a modem for their house or a wireless access point, do they ever change the user credentials? Do they ever set it off at defaults? No. And you can prove that by taking your phone and driving by a lot of apartment complexes. And how many are labeled like Belkin and Linksys? Because they didn't even bother to change those default configurations. Software that's bad. You know? Limitations on older hardware or even some newer hardware. Enterprise-based issues. So now, like that SolarWinds attack, we open up that entire network to a software piece that's designed to help us with it. And what it really did was allow us to bury malware everywhere inside of that. And it's getting worse. We now have more devices connected than ever. Look around your own house. When I when I log into my wireless at my house, I show about 35 devices in my house. What the heck's all in there? Everything from my thermostat, I've got Alexas, we've got other devices in the house. They're everywhere. Our phones are on constantly and are becoming a new attack vector. Great. And that more devices, the more things that are out there, leads to the idea of those attackers can launch quickly because they can compromise millions of devices at once and use those to attack other devices. That DVR at your house, if you have a video system at your house with a Chinese-made DVR, so in other words, you went down to Costco and you bought the $350 8-camera system, can that be used as an attack? Yes. And quite often it is. Well, now some nation states are paying hackers. They're paying people. So our attacks are getting more sophisticated. So we found that the federal government had all kinds of available tools. And so we're still learning stuff from the Snowden issue that NSA had hidden remote vulnerabilities and all kinds of things in software. They knew about it, but didn't tell Microsoft or didn't tell Cisco or whoever these vulnerabilities were in. And now we have more automated tools. It's easier for us to find these exploits. And now everybody's got a fast broadband connection. Well, I can take over your computers in a zombie attack and use those to find more. And we've all got these big fat pipes that make that a little easier. A lot of products just don't even update. So you buy your little cheapy router, wireless router at Best Buy, and you pay $59. Are they going to update their security for $59? No. So we have more devices without updates going out there. This idea of personal devices everywhere. And so in our business, even here at Peru, we've had to figure out how to deal with everybody's personal devices. How do I deal with that? We've got everybody walking around with their phones, their Androids, their computers. We've got faculty and staff with iPads and all kinds of things. So now we're bringing in these personal devices that I can't physically control and into a business. But are you going to tell the vice president, no, you can't have your iPad on our network? And then the last one I think is one of the biggest ones, users. I'd like to think everybody is smart, wonderful, intelligent, and they may be, but cybersecurity may not be their niche. And I'll give you an example of this one. My wife works for UNL, and she works for a department called CCFL. They're actually housed off campus, and they rent out some floors of a building downtown. And there's about 50 people in there with PhDs. You think, great, a room full of very intelligent people. About a year and a half ago, they all got an email saying, hey, log in to something called Firefly. And if you've got a campus job, you may have seen Firefly, but it is a payroll maintenance system. So you log in that, you can see your payroll, you can change your deductions, all those kinds of things. And it said, hey, log in to see your anticipated raises. There'll be a letter there for you. Well, it was timed right. So these PhDs aren't dummies. If they got it in them, but it was about the time for annual reviews. They just did all their annual reviews. It came out about the right time. And they clicked on the link. And that link looks very much like Firefly. Identical. So somebody cloned a website. And what it actually did was very clever. So it would actually bypass and log you into Firefly, the actual system. But it asked for one additional thing before it did that. It said for verification purposes or something like this to continue your employment, and it was very well drafted. It asked for your username, it asked for your password, and then it's needed your Social Security to confirm. So 50 plus employees, right around 50 roughly. 32 of them immediately that day logged in and gave away their Social Security number and their UNL ID and password. Those are PhDs. So how are we going to expect grandma sitting on her computer that she just got and you're trying to get her to show her how to go to Facebook? How do we expect grandma to deal with it? How do we expect your average employee to deal with these kinds of things? It's not their domain, and even those people that are really good. So we have to think about what security is. We need some terminology and how this all relates to our safety. So you may say, man, I got a credit card and it got hacked and they stole $500, but I didn't have to pay for it, right? It does come back to you. So whether it's in higher fees, they're not giving away money. The credit card companies, businesses, nobody's giving away money. They don't want to pay out for these issues. So we need some terminology and some ways to think about it. The other thing that's really bad for security people is this. The more secure we are, the more inconvenient we are. Unfortunately, we have to find some happy middle ground where we're secure and least inconvenienced. So you're starting to see a lot of things, and even here. So to log into Blackboard, I now have to use a third-party authenticator. So in other words, I log in with my username, my password, and then it sends it out to something called Duo, and I have to authenticate who I am with Duo on my phone. So is it more inconvenient? Yeah. Now I got to make sure I remember to bring my phone, because I can't get in without my phone or attaching it to my phone number, so then I have to call in the office, and it's inconvenient. But it also gives us some additional security. And I will say, as a college, we've worked hard to become more secure. We actually now have one of our graduates working as a security officer here on campus, and that's all they do. Because it wasn't that long ago, Blackboard, the way you logged into Blackboard was with your Social Security number. And it was a 6-digit code that you would use to authenticate with it. Is that safe? Is that secure? Are you giving out your Social Security number to log in? But that was the model at the time, and everybody said, oh, that's great. This is pretty good. But it certainly was easy because it's a number you all know. You didn't have to learn another number and another password. But it was easy to do. So, information security. Securing information that is digital. Well, we're going to go a little beyond. There's probably information and things that are still in paper forms that need to be secured, but typically our information now is digital. Most companies, all of their information is stored digitally. It's preserved somewhere on a storage device of some kind. It can be transmitted over a network. So in other words, we want it to be available, but it also has to be safe in some way. So there is a term we're going to use that you're going to see, and that is something called CIA. Just like the CIA that you may go to work for at some point if you graduate. Confidentiality. So in other words, only people that have the rights to that information can access it. Integral. In other words, that information is unaltered and correct. So nobody's manipulated it. And available. It's available when the users need it. So think about a hospital. And hospitals now have a huge amount of information stored digitally about you and as a patient. So you don't want that information about your health concerns being passed out to everybody, do you? Probably not. Think about all the times we've seen like Britney Spears ends up in the hospital and somebody gets fired from a hospital because they showed up and had information about her. That's that idea of confidentiality. We want to make sure that it's restricted to only the people that need to know. Here at our campus, I can't see your financial aid information as your advisor because that's information that I don't need to know. But the financial aid office certainly does, and they want that information to not be changed and altered by somebody, and that information needs to be available. And we're in a 24-hour-a-day, 365-day a year. We want things to be available every minute of every day. The original versions of things like student information systems would work during the day, so maybe from 8 a.m. till 5, and then they would start doing things like backups. We're not able to do that anymore. People want information 24 hours a day. Amazon has to be up 24 hours a day and available because people want to shop. People want to use those resources. So another way to look at kind of in a graphically model is this is how we're going to protect it. All of that's inside our bullseye. So we can use products, we can use people, and we can use policies and procedures. So we're trying to create multiple layers to protect that data. So policies. Who has access to the file room? Who has access to our data closet? Who has access to log into certain systems? And certainly we can use hardware, we can use software. And part of that, I think one of the biggest one is that idea of people. People are important. Getting people to think in a security mindset is important. And I will say it's kind of weird, and that's one of the good things about this area, for example, the Midwest, is people are very friendly and they're willing to help and they're very eager to help. But it's also a downside. One of the downsides is they're willing and eager to help. If you walk into a small rural hospital and you look like you belong there, they will lead you back to that data closet because they've been taught and brought up, hey, that's friendly, that's nice. And so sometimes we have to break people a little bit, their built-in habits, because we want them to be security conscious. And so it's a very nebulous balance. But if you walk in and you had things like an AT&T or Verizon badge on, or whatever your local carrier is, you can get in a lot of places. People don't even question it. Walk in, looks like you work for AT&T and you got a clipboard. You'd be amazed how many places you can go and how much people will do. So we also need to think about a couple of other terms. What are these things we have of value? And those digital assets, it's hard to say. But here at Peru, we can say student records are certainly an asset. It's got value. What type of threat? So if somebody came in and they decided, man, I really needed to change my grade, is that a threat to those assets? Yeah. And then we have to look at who the threat actor or the person, place, or thing that's attacking us. So Peru State College, you think, man, we're a small little college in the middle of nowhere. Who would ever want to attack and find out our student records? Think anybody'd want student records? It's got a lot of information about people. And in fact, the typical attack, when you think, hey, they're going to steal student records, you think they're going to go out and put out like credit cards on us, right? They're going to go and find our credit rating, and they're going to order a bunch of credit cards, and they're going to get a couple $1,000s out of that. Well, right now, that's not what is actually being sold. What is actually very valuable now is your medical data. Why would my medical data be valuable? What could I do with it? So instead of stealing $1,000 from somebody's credit card, what if I set up a fake medical practice and I built insurance companies and Medicare and the federal government and all these other different entities that are involved in healthcare, and I started billing them for all kinds of procedures? Because I've got things like your Social Security, I've got your date of birth, I've got some of your limited medical records, and I started billing everybody that I stole those records for a hip replacement. 50 grand a whack. Now I'm talking some big money. And so you can start pulling those medical records and steal a huge amount of money. Sometimes there's even people like physicians who get into financial trouble and they're willing to help with that. So some of the data we think is valuable isn't really what they're looking for. So this is our idea that they have a little cute little slide. So our fence has a hole, so that's what we call a vulnerability. There's something that can get inside of there. Our thief or a threat actor, well, he's going to go through that fence hole, and what he's going to steal is your scooter. That's that idea of we're taking information, we're exploiting what's out there. Some people will walk down the street and they'll go, man, that fence is falling down. Some people are going to see it falling down and they're going to say, hey, there's a scooter over there with a key in it. I should probably go ahead and just steal that. And we see that on all kinds of TV shows. People who typically you think would be very honest, if they have the opportunity presented to them, well, suddenly they're not as honest as you would think. So, vulnerability, something that allows us to get inside. The means, the threat factor, another, how do they get in? That hole in that fence, the hole in our firewall, the hole in our procedure so you can walk in and just walk out with stacks of records. A risk. So in other words, something we think that is vulnerable can be a risk. And so when we know we have risk, we have a couple of choices about what we do. So we can just accept it and we say, man, we know there's a risk. It's going to possibly happen, but we think the risk is pretty minimal. We can compare that to weather, actually. So if I think about risks and I think about weather, is a hurricane going to really affect our college that much? No. But could a tornado? Is the risk much higher? So I'm probably going to accept the risk of a hurricane, but I'm going to do something else with a tornado. And what I might do is transfer that risk to a third party. And you guys all do that every time. When you get out in your car, do you have a stack of cash to pay somebody if you get in a car wreck? No, you're buying in car insurance. You're transferring that risk to State Farm or Blue Cross or whoever's got your car insurance. So you can minimize that by transferring that risk to a third party. We can avoid it. So we identify that risk, and maybe we choose to change our behaviors. So in our car, maybe we say, you know what? I've studied this risk of driving, and it seems to me that by these insurance statistics, that if I don't drive from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, I am statistically safer, because it's from 11 o'clock at night until 7 in the morning that the most per however many miles are driven wrecks are. So we're avoiding that risk by making some changes in our activity. And then mitigate. In other words, we take that risk and we try to minimize it somehow. So again, if we use our car example, you turn on the headlights. You're mitigating the risk of driving in the dark because you've changed your behavior, you turned on the headlights. Great. Maybe you drive slower. So instead of driving 95 down Highway 2, you only drive 75. You mitigate those risks. So there's a lot of different strategies we can employ. And a lot of times we actually employ multiple strategies of these because we know that we can't get away completely. So here's some examples from that scooter scenario. So, and then we put them into information security. So the asset is employee database. The threat would be the data. How do we steal it? The threat actor. So notice, attacker, a cyber attacker, or a natural event. They're both able to remove that database. So flaws in the database logins. So what do we want to do? Well, there's some things that are popping up. We know, hey, this data theft thing, we hear about that a lot. Probably want to keep our data. And we don't want to have identity theft. That seems really bad. And there are some legal consequences for not securing our data. So there are some federal and state laws that say we need to protect your data in such and such a manner. So student information data has some legal requirements to protect it. Credit card data has some legal information. Well, we also want to maintain productivity. If I have to shut down my company because my computer got hacked, that's not very productive. Or we're not going to be able to make widgets or whatever it is we do. And we've got a new area that is starting to emerge as an even bigger threat, and that's that idea of cyber terrorism. And how do I protect against cyber terrorism? We're going to see examples of it, and I think we're going to have some very serious cyber attacks that are going to be sponsored by nation states. So countries like Iran that don't like us, or people that are just wanting to cause some kind of chaos, because we've got a lot of vulnerabilities out there in things like the power grid, our utilities. If we could, as a terrorist group, shut down Wall Street for 4 or 5 days, can you imagine the economic impact that would have? And I very much liken it already to 9/11. So some of you can remember 9/11. Some of you were just crawling out of the crib at that point. But 9/11 caused a lot of changes in our environment. So people willing to get on a plane with a box cutter, and then later one guy trying to light his shoe on fire, means all of us have to go through a torturous process to get on an airplane. Air flying used to be fun. I know, unless you're my age, you don't remember that flying used to be really a fun activity. Now, it's literally a strip search to get through the security. You have to arrive hours and hours early. We've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on this TSA, which in almost every test that they have performed to see if they could actually stop bombs and things from being loaded onto a plane have failed. So that doesn't work. But it causes a lot of inconvenience and cost. I'm going to argue that in some ways, terrorists won on 9/11, at least in regards to the airline industry. So now we have a couple of things that have happened. We've got all these security checkpoints. We don't allow you in with more than 2 ounces of liquid or whatever silly number it is. But if I'm a terrorist, here's what I'm thinking in my brain. If you've been to a busy airport, which right now is kind of not happening, but if you remember when airports used to be very busy. And so the one that sticks out in my mind is Las Vegas's airport, McCarran Airport. When you are trying to get onto a plane there, your security all goes through one point, and you have 500 to 1,500 people all wedged into these lines trying to get in through security. If I'm a terrorist and I'm already willing to kill myself in a plane, and I was going to take out 100 people in a plane, why don't I take that same bomb vest I was going to try to sneak onto the plane, get into the middle of that queue with 1,500 people? I've not been checked. There's no way to know who I am. and I take out a large contingent of people. All this TSA effort, and guess what? We just bypassed it, went around. It even gets worse than that. We've seen in Europe, we've moved on from the airline model, the terrorists have, and so now, hey, I'm just going to go steal a van or a truck, and I'm going to drive through people that are all crowded around a busy street. Same outcome, but I avoided all your security. We've seen it here in the United States. It is fairly easy, if you wanted to build it, to build a very high explosive device. You could put it into something like a U-Haul truck and drive it to a federal building. Oops, wait, we already did that, didn't we? So we had a guy named Timothy McVeigh loaded up a U-Haul truck with fertilizer and diesel fuel and made a bomb and blew up a federal building. How hard is it for you to find that recipe for a fuel and fertilizer bomb if you go on the internet? Same kind of idea. We've got that issues are out there. How do we stop that? How do we protect it a little better? So, identity theft. This is the one people most of the time think of when they think of, hey, there's some kind of cybersecurity issue. That's that idea of trying to get financial gain by stealing somebody else's IDs. Well, it typically, here's the weird part, we see all these reports on TV and it makes it sound like it's a horrible thing. Typically, it's not actually somebody stealing it off the internet. It's your grandkids or somebody who knows you or a family friend, or you threw it out in the trash. But somehow you've stolen another person's information and you used it for financial gain. So, creating new credit cards. One of the popular ones now is the fraudulent tax returns. Because if you have a little bit of information about somebody, you can create a fraudulent tax return and get the federal government to send you a check. Well, that'd be really nice. So, identity theft is a big problem. I don't think it's as big a problem as what we've got in other areas. However, if you're the victim of identity theft, it's pretty darn serious. It's hard to reestablish yourself once you've been a victim of identity theft. And depending on who steals that from you, it's hard to sometimes get a prosecution or to even get rid of some of that information. So you do need to be careful about it. It is a concern. So a whole lot of laws. In fact, there's new ones going up every day. States are putting out new laws. So HIPAA law is one of the big ones we see. Sarbanes-Oxley. There is the Graham-Beach-Lilly Act, the Payment PCI Acts. You see a lot of these acts go in. Here's the problem with them. If they're already willing to cheat, are they going to pay attention to the law? No. But what these laws do is force companies to be more proactive so that we have better controls on our credit cards. Sometimes. That said, it still happens that we lose data, that we lose these credit cards. So on this, we're looking at the cost of salaries. So fixing an issue, cleaning up from it, the time it takes. So here you have a company that's got 500 employees. The average salary, $30 an hour. We took 5 of those to combat the attack, took 80 hours to clean it up. The lost salaries alone, $28,000. But you've also got those other people that aren't working right then. So you can do two things. You could pay them, or you could say, hey, why don't you take a couple days off? What happens when we let employees go home? They tend to get cranky. They want money too. They want to get paid. So it is very easy to get very expensive. It also hurts that company from the side of reputation. So think about Peru. We'll use Peru as an example. Peru State College gets attacked. We lose all your student information data. Is it going to be harder to attract students in the future? Yeah. For us, Now, Harvard's managed to lose student data, and they've done okay, right? Almost every large major university has actually lost student data. It's pretty sad. But I think, in some ways, the most frightening thing is the idea of cyber terrorism. And I think if we saw what happened last week in Washington, I think we should be frightened. We have a lot of vulnerabilities. A lot of them. Imagine getting into a hospital system and changing orders for drugs. Could you actually kill somebody that way? What if you got into a water system and you turned the water into essentially they were drinking an acid or a base? That would be a fairly horrific thing. Financial catastrophe. What if we got into the power grid? Think about if we shut off the power grid in places. You could cause physical damage to it as other generators and other power plants tried to take over. So, all of these industries are highly targeted. Power plants, air traffic controllers, water, sewer systems, military. You think people are targeting Offutt Air Force Base all the time? What about banks? They're targeted all the time. Are there other targets? What else could damage us around here? Is there anything? What if we went after the telephone companies and you could shut down cellular communications? Would people panic if they couldn't get on their phone and play Facebook? And yeah, I think you would be devastated. Think of all the data that gets transferred. And this area here, here's an odd duck fact, but the area we're in Peru, we're right in the middle of the United States, and there is more fiber going through this area than you would ever imagine. And there are more high-speed communication links going through here. What if I simply organized 28 of my friends to go across the country with backhoes and dig up and cut up that fiber? And we did a tabletop exercise when I was in telecom. And so this has been a few years ago, but I don't think the numbers have changed significantly. And that's what we estimated it would take to bring down the communication system in the U.S. And it doesn't take a lot to find those points. Where that fiber optic cables are buried is pretty public. And there's places where multiple carriers all converge to do things like cross on a railroad bridge or to go across a river. And if I take out multiple carriers in multiple locations, it would take weeks to restore communications in the U.S. I think that would be detrimental. It would also take a lot of other industries some coordination to try to figure out how they can continue to operate, such as all our distributed power plants. They rely on that communications loop. And it can get expensive very quickly. Now, that was a few years ago. But if I'm really wanting to cause damage and I can find enough people to go out and get onto planes, do you think I can find them that are willing to run a backhoe? Yeah. Would not be that hard to do. And if you take out the actual regen stations where they have to replace equipment, so now we replace digging it up, we replace it with a couple of homemade fuel and fertilizer bombs, not that hard to do. Yikes. So now we've got all kinds of issues. So, threat actor, that is that person or entity doing this. A lot of times it's a financial goal. So ransomware, we're going to find out fairly quickly, ransomware is really being done in a lot of cases by organized, we'll call them companies, but you might liken it to the mob idea that you have in your head. So it's criminal elements that are working like a business to try to extort money. So financial against individuals, financial against large companies and government. So maybe you got fired by UNL and you decide you're going to cause them some financial harm. So there's a lot of different threat actors out there. A lot of them. Foreign countries would love to bring down parts of the United States infrastructure or infrastructure in Europe or other areas across the world. So how possible some of these things are depends a lot on abilities, funding. And I guarantee the same things I talk about China trying to do to us, are we willing to do the same thing to China, and we have programmers and hackers working on the same process? Yeah. Guaranteed that we are doing the same thing. So, whether that person or actor is internal or external, if I'm internal, I get a lot of extra benefits because I already know things about this system. I know things about the company. I'm getting fired, so I've put a script in that's going to delete all the personnel data, and I happen to know that they do really crappy backups. Oops. So what we find is there's a lot of damage done by internal. They've been at some point inside of the organization. And what their motivations are, sometimes we'll never know. But there are a lot of people out there. So there is a term, and here's where it gets a little scary. Nearly everything we're going to talk about in this class, you can go out and find with very little effort. You can find tools to do it out on the web. The same tools we use to protect your data. So the other day you mentioned something called Kali Linux. The same tools that are in Kali Linux that we can use for protecting our data can be used as an attack. And people can download it off the internet. And so there's this term script kiddies. So if you want to attack something, you can literally go on the internet and find a script and find coding to do it. You can even now hire services. Again, that idea of a company or organization that's somewhat like the mafia will actually sell you their services. Hey, you want to go take down the website? Here's our cost to do it. So we see a lot of these attacks coming out of this idea of script kiddies, or people who really don't have a lot of skill, but they had a lot of searching skill, and it doesn't take a lot to find some of these things. So this is kind of a guess. Nobody really knows. But notice there's a lot of people in this group that aren't very highly skilled. And it doesn't work like the movies where they're sitting down there at a command line typing away usually. They're pre-prepared scripts. Things are done ahead of time. And there's a lot of research into some of these attacks. But if I can just go on the internet and find some attack hacks, oops. But on the other side, I don't know how to tell you to protect yourself from it because, again, a lot of it is the same tools we're going to teach you in here on the good side can be used on the nefarious side. So hacktivists is a term that has emerged. They're people that attack things for an ideological reason. So terrorists. They want to bring down the financial system because they don't believe in capitalism or whatever happens to be the particular thing. We see a lot of this in elections. Websites being changed. Data being broken into. So, man, we're going to probably see some from this election, quite frankly. You're going to see website defacings, trying to disable banks and other accounts. But these people typically have an ideological motive. The most dangerous ones are these nation-state actors. They have the resources, they have the expertise, they're hiring the best programmers, they're very motivated. And one of the things that they use is something called an advanced persistent threat. And that's where the danger of something like this SolarWinds attack that we're going to look at a lot in here comes from. So it's not a, hey, I attacked it this week and I did some damage. It's putting into place resources inside of these companies, inside of federal government, inside of other organizations that will last for years. Even now, we know that when organizations get targeted and they find out they've been infiltrated, it's not that they infiltrated a day or two ago. Right now, the average is about 180 days these people have been in their system. 6 months. How much stuff have they left with? Data have they left with? Information. They now know how your company operates. They now know your procedures. They know who other companies you're connected with. So, advanced persistent threats are one of our big, horrible things, and we're going to talk a lot about what might be the result of this SolarWinds issue. And it's kind of getting downplayed. There's a lot of other crazy stuff going on in the news. But I think, quite frankly, when right now we've identified at least 250 federal government computer installations that have SolarWinds and have been attacked and had inflammation put into those networks. And it didn't just stop at that one computer. They're all over the entire network. What do we do? What do we do? We don't even know what they're looking for in some cases or what they're trying to do. So insiders present us a special problem. So somebody's getting fired. Somebody who says, you know what, I'd like to make some extra money, so I'm going to hide some stock trades, or I'm going to use some insider information. So insiders are really one of our biggest threat vectors. We have people that get bribed or coerced into stealing data. And you think, man, that's in the movies. That doesn't happen here. So 2 years ago, state senator for our state, hiding in his little unicameral up there, had a state laptop, and he said, you know what? I want to get me some of that web porn, and I want to get me the Russian web porn girls to look at. Well, what it really was an extortion attack. And so these videos of him with his webcam girl were offered to sale back to him. Hey, if you do certain acts for us. Why would somebody like a Russian mob care about anything in Nebraska? Could a legislature here affect prices of grain and other things? Yeah. It's always good to have, legislatures in your pocket. So luckily this guy did it on a state computer. And so he went to the state CIO and said, hey, this is what I did. He is not currently a state senator anymore. Thank goodness. But it happens. Was he being bribed or coerced into it? Sure. And it happens a lot. A lot. If I can get something over on you and I can coerce you somehow, so who's going to do this? Not necessarily just governments. What about the latest recipe for corn seed or seed corn? Do you think that's an attack? Yeah. The Chinese, actually, there's a couple of people sitting in federal prison right now for stealing designs for corn. So organized crime's in there, competitors, brokers. Some people just want to get in the middle and sell data. They think that there is some advantage, some cost in there. Cyber terrorists. Once again, we have that term, cyber terrorism. So what we'd like to do is layer. So what I'm going to tell you in here is there's no absolute answer. There are models that work better than others. There are things that we can do. Are we ever going to stop any of this? No. No. But can we limit it? So this idea of layering, just like when you go out in the winter, one big heavy coat doesn't work as well as a couple of layers of coats because you can change them and it takes a little bit to get through all those layers. So layering, limiting, diversity, obscurity, simplicity. Ugh, that's a lot of words. We'll finish these up really quickly. Let me see the time. Oh, yeah, we got plenty of time. All right. So layering. So we put things in layers. So if all we have is one firewall, and it's very evident that what the brand of that firewall is and that we didn't update security on it, it's pretty easy to get through that. However, if we have multiple layers of firewalls, it's harder to get through those. So think about your house. If I want to really protect my house, not only do I put a lock on the door, but I also will put a fence around the house with barbed wire. So now you have to get through 2 layers to get in. And so if I'm very determined, eventually you can get in there, but it's going to delay me. Maybe you'll see me out on the camera, or you'll see me out on that fence cutting it apart. So layering is one of the models we use. We try to have second and third and fourth levels of restrictions. So limiting is what we do. So we limit who has access to data and who has access to resources. So maybe it's we put in restrictions on who can access files or who can access parts of files. So I can't access your financial aid information and steal your identity. Great. Maybe as a student worker, you can't get in and change somebody's grades. Perfect. We also probably have some policies about that so that if we see you trying to get into somebody else's grades as a student worker, you're probably going to be fired and removed from campus. So, technology, procedural. So in other words, some item is sitting in there. Diversity. Well, as a campus, we're working on diversity. But when we talk about diversity and security, what we're talking about is models of diversity that are different. So 3 layers of the same protection are not the same as 3 layers of protection from different vendors, for example. So that we have different manufacturers. That way, if one has a security hole, hopefully the other one covers it. We have different people and groups. So it's always scary. If you put all your security eggs in the basket of one individual or one vendor coming to you, you have an issue. So different layers. Now we have different layers of diversity. So different vendors. Maybe we have a firewall from Cisco and one from Juniper Networks inside of that. Obscurity. In other words, obscuring the vision. So these are ideas that we want to try to hide as much information as possible about the interior of our computer network. So we don't want to publish who we bought servers from, what kinds of servers, what operating systems we're running, what software we're running. We try to hide all of that from the outside world. Now, some of it's pretty easy to guess. Hey, I bet you're going to use Microsoft Office, right? Yeah, so if there's a vulnerability in Microsoft Office, virtually every company has got an issue with it. But if we can hide, the better we can hide our company, the better we are. And so some small companies get by on that idea of obscurity because they're hiding in a little small town. But now that the World Wide Web can find those vulnerabilities pretty easy, that's going away. Simplicity. And really this goes back to that idea of it needs to be convenient and simple on the inside. Because if I have users and they have to run back and get a pre-printed code from me every time they log into the computer, and the computer's logging off every 2 minutes like it should in a medical facility, I need simplicity. And so later on we're going to talk about some ideas. So simplistic on the inside, tough to get into from the outside. And then we'll talk about how that can go badly wrong too. But we want something that's very complex, hard for somebody to get to on the outside, but yet on the inside you can use it. So we're trying to minimize that inconvenience. Trying to minimize that. So there are a lot of frameworks that you can go find out there. So the financial industry has some, the government has some from NIST, and I think NIST is what you guys use in IT here, is the guidelines from NIST. If I got, and I'd love to get Curtis in here, so we'll have to have him give us a talk. But there are industry frameworks that give us some ideas, some kind of best practices where to go. If you're in the nuclear power industry, or in fact actually in the nuclear or the power industry at all, there's something called NERC. And so there are restrictions and rules and designs. Now, one of the downsides to this, here's those frameworks that are all designed and laid out, and who can get access to those? About anybody. So there is the side of, holy cow. But it gives you some best practices. Things like changing user accounts immediately when you get a new system or a new piece of hardware. The amount of routers that have the default login credentials exposed are pretty numerous. I'll admit to it in this lab, and partly because we allow students to interact with it. If you look up the default configuration for our router on the online, you can get into it from in here. I will severely beat your grade point average up if you do anything bad to it, but we use it as a quick way to look at things. Is it best practices? No, it's absolutely worst practice. And none of those documents are ever going to say that's a good thing to do. But I have walked into a lot of organizations who didn't have any clue. I have walked into organizations, and so I'll leave you with a really good story about one. I went into an organization that was highly secure. It's a law enforcement facility. Well, let's use the term secure kind of loosely here. So the first thing I did was I actually used a spudging tool to let myself into the building. So a spudging tool is used when we build some network inserts, and it's really just a small little metal hook and flat and really small. And when they installed the door, so when we talk about physical security, they left a pretty good sized gap, and I was actually able to hook the door latch and open the door and let myself right into this facility. So we started out a little confrontational there with them. But I came in actually on the IT side. I was trying to show them a couple things, and they actually used a system at the time that was completely standalone, was not connected to the internet. And the only way, when the vendor wanted to do some updates, they had a cable they would drag over to this and plug it in, or so they thought. So I started doing a little looking around, and they were starting to get to the point where they were doing a lot of car cameras and things, and so I was asking about Wi-Fi, how they got some of that. We don't have any Wi-Fi here. We don't use it. It's insecure. And I was like, oh, that's not actually a bad thing in this particular setting. But I happen to look at my phone, and my phone pops up and says, do you want to connect to this network? Belkin, whatever. And I'm like, well, that's odd, because this facility was not near any place that I should have been able to see Wi-Fi. And so I asked a little more about the database system they're using, and I said, can you give me a dummy account so I can log in and just see it? And I logged in, and I just happened to, it popped up and goes, hey, there's a newer update available. And I went, newer update available? I thought you told me it wasn't connected to the internet. All right, whatever. So I let it update. It's clearly connected to the internet. And so it was a small server, and it had 2 LAN ports on it, or probably maybe 4 or whatever. But it had 2 cables running into it, and I went, well, okay, where did they... It was, well, that one's hooked up to the switch so it can get to the printers and everything. But, okay, all right. So, and then they said, well, all that's shoved in this cabinet. And so I opened up a bottom cabinet, and it's just piled. It looks like a rat's nest of cabling. And what I spotted, though, was 2 little antennas poking up in there. And I pulled out this Belkin device, and I'm looking at it going, I thought you said you didn't have Wi-Fi. We don't. Well, what's this? Well, the local vendor, he put that in there because we had like a 24-port switch, and it wasn't big enough, and we needed a couple more ports. So he just used that as a way to get us some more ports for our network. Huh. So is this secured at all? No. Can I just walk outside that building, log into my laptop, and search all over their network? Yep. Did they have anything to protect any of their files? Nope, because they thought, we're not connected to the internet. Bullshit. They were. Not only that were they connected to the internet, but they're broadcasting out. So if you wanted to be a criminal in that particular county, you could hide outside of their building, log remotely into their network, and probably just erase your files. Because the other thing I discovered when I'm looking at this database system they're using for storing information, it was too much problem for them to secure their data when you logged into it. What they actually just logged in with was their first name and no password. So if you could guess the first name of an officer in that county, you could log into their database system and erase your own criminal history in that county. And my head was throbbing a little bit. So we took a lot of pains, and we took a lot of efforts, and I haven't been back there for a while, so I'm scared to see what they have done at this point now. But we tried to secure them, but it really was, there was a local vendor in town who sold a few computers, and I didn't really have a clear idea about network security. Not much, as I came to discover. But yeah, he gained a few extra ports by plugging in this Belkin router wireless access point. And I'll give him credit. It was kind of handy because I could get on the wireless on my laptop then. But we tied it down. So that framework, yeah, it should have been in place, and the State Patrol had actually been in there, and the State Patrol does audits. Well, clearly what they do is they paper audit, and they ask them questions, and they say, nope, none of that's here, and then they walk out the door. So those frameworks are good if they're actually used and followed and used correctly. All right, so for this week, there is that discussion board, so make sure you've finished the video, and there is a short quiz, if I remember right, for Chapter 1. So we're just talking about who and what and why to start with before we get into any of the really fun stuff. So this is a lot of terminology, knowing who's going to attack you, why they're attacking you, what those reasons are. And so next week we're going to start looking at specific cases. We'll start pulling some news data, and then we'll actually start doing some attacks of our own pretty quickly. We're going to turn you guys into script kiddie hackers before the end of this class. All right. Whew. That's a lot of talking with these masks on, I will tell you that. That is the downside to trying to talk through them for a long time. All right, so we will meet on Tuesday. Remember that we are not having we are not having class on Monday in celebration of Martin Luther King Day. There are some activities, and I think some of those are able to be zoomed into at this point. So I would encourage you to go to any of those activities if you're able to. Learn more about some diversity. We certainly need some on our campus, I think, at some time. So, and I think the recent political events have revealed that we still have a long ways to go in terms of equality, unfortunately. All right, any other questions? Going once, going twice. Snowstorm in Omaha tomorrow, right? All right, thank you guys for your attendance.